Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Partnership for Accelerating Cancer Therapies, or PACT, press conference. I'm John Burklow, NIH Communications Director, and I'll be your moderator this morning. I want to introduce our speakers and briefly run through the sequence of events. First, we'll hear from Mr. Reed Cordish, Assistant to the President for Intragovernmental and Technology Initiatives at the White House. Then Mr. Eric Hargan, Acting Secretary of Health and Human Services. Dr. Francis Collins, Director of the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Thomas Hudson, Vice President of Oncology Discovery and Early Development at AbbVie. Next, Dr. Doug Lowy, Acting Director of the National Cancer Institute. And Ms. Melinda Bikini, who is an immunotherapy patient and cancer survivor. After we hear from our speakers, I'll open it up for Q&A for credentialed press. We have reporters in the room, but also watching on webcast. For those watching the webcast, if you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the question box, and your name and affiliation will already appear. For reporters in the room asking questions, I ask that you include your name and affiliation. And in order for everyone to get an opportunity, please limit your questions to one and a follow-up. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Reed Cordish.
Thank you very much. It is truly a pleasure and an honor for me to be here and representing the Trump administration and the White House. I head up the Office of American Innovation, which is an initiative led by Jared Kushner, and we have the enviable role of getting the ability to work on many of the forward-thinking initiatives, very positive, bipartisan in nature initiatives of the president. One of the interactions that I most enjoy and that we're most proud of is the interactions with Dr. Collins and his wonderful team at NIH. They're fostering this golden age of biomedicine in the United States and for the world is truly remarkable and is one of the great envies of the world, and should be recognized for the incredible accomplishments of what Dr. Collins and the NIH team has been able to reach. Today we are here to announce their latest achievement, which is the Partnership for Accelerating Cancer Therapies, a public-private partnership between NIH, FDA, and 11 pharmaceutical companies. It represents the type of collaboration and partnership between the private sector and government that this administration is trying to foster across many sectors. And I think this represents it in the best possible way. We truly believe that when we have the best minds of the private sector and the best minds of government working together, there is no limit to what we can accomplish. And that's what we expect out of this PACT. So it's a true pleasure. I'm also very privileged to be able to introduce our new Acting Secretary of Health and Human Services. It certainly gives the President great comfort that a man of your stature and a man of your accomplishments is stepped in to this role, and we know you'll do a wonderful job. So thank you. I didn't say his name, which is Acting Director Eric Hagan. Thank you.
Thank you, Reed, for that introduction and for representing President Trump here today. We know today's announcement is part of an effort that President Trump is deeply devoted to, advancing life-saving cures for deadly diseases. Thank you to Dr. Collins and Dr. Lowy from the National Institutes of Health and the National Cancer Institute, and thank you to our partners from private industry for joining us here as well. Thank you also to Melinda Bikini, who will speak a little later about her personal experience with the transformative, life-saving potential of immunotherapy. Lastly, thank you to the thousands of NIH researchers in Bethesda and across the country who work every day to make so many medical miracles possible. And thank you to the other employees of NIH who make the researchers' work possible. It's a special honor to be here in my first public appearance as Acting Secretary, because HHS's role in advancing medical research is a cherished, important part of the mission of the department, and today is a major step forward in that mission. NIH is also close to my heart personally because during a previous tour of duty at HHS, I had NIH as a client, believe it or not, when I worked in the Public Health Division of the Office of the General Counsel at HHS. So be that as it may, we're here to announce the partnership for Accelerating Cancer Therapies, which is a $215 million public-private partnership, which involves NIH and the private companies here today to battle cancer and boost the potential and availability of immunotherapies. Now, immunotherapy is one of the most promising fronts we have today in the war on cancer, and a public-private partnership like this one enables NIH and the private innovators to work together in accelerating their research. NIH does the basic scientific research, like identifying which biomarkers make patients well-suited to certain treatments, while the private sector helps develop the actual drugs and brings them to market. Now, but the scale of public-private partnership is relatively new. The first such agreement was launched under Dr. Collins in 2014, the Accelerating Medicines Partnership, or AMP. That partnership covers treatments for Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain autoimmune disorders, and involves many of the groups in this room. But the concept of combining public investment in biomedical research and private industry will mean more cures and more lives saved in shorter time. I'll give you a little piece of historical perspective on that. Last week, we had the privilege of celebrating 4 NIH grantees who had won Nobel Prizes. The very first NIH grantee who received a Nobel Prize was back in 1939, an NCI grantee, physicist Ernest Lawrence. His development of the cyclotron gave rise to a treatment for cancer that involved targeted bursts of neutrons. But in that case, it took decades and decades for researchers, really into the 1970s, to determine what kinds of patients and what kinds of cancers were suitable for neutron treatments. Things move, thankfully, a lot faster now at NIH and NCI. With this partnership, we expect things to move faster still, and faster cures mean longer lives. So today's announcement is part of broad efforts underway at HHS to advance the science of oncology under the umbrella now of the Cancer Moonshot. These efforts also include the work of the Food and Drug Administration under Commissioner Scott Gottlieb and FDA's Oncology Center of Excellence in particular. So under President Trump, we are going to continue making significant investments in cancer cures. Advancing great American medicine and science is a top priority for this administration. So thank you again for joining us here today to celebrate this. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, one of the key players in that effort on behalf of the administration, Dr. Francis Collins, Director of the National Institutes of Health, to elaborate on this new partnership in a little more detail. Dr. Collins.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I know the acting secretary in the sort of first 36 hours of his job has a few other things on his plate, and so told us ahead of time he wouldn't be able to stay, but it was really wonderful for him to make time to be here this morning. And I also want to thank Reed Cordish for showing support for this important partnership by joining us here today and in many conversations over the past few months. I want to take a minute now, though, to introduce the principals who are here from the partnership, beginning with the representatives of those 11 companies that have joined in this enterprise. And I will call their name and ask them to stand so that the press can see who's who. And I think they're in alphabetical order of their last name. There's no particular reason, therefore, to have chosen the order here. But let me start with Nicholas Dorkopoli. Nick is Vice President and Head of Oncology Diagnostics at Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson. Next, I have Peter Hammerman, who's Global Head of Oncology Translational Research at Novartis. Next, and you'll hear from him in a moment, Tom Hudson, who's Vice President of Oncology Discovery and Early Development at AbbVie. Next, Casey Hutchinson, Vice President of North America Government Affairs at Gilead Sciences. Next, Diane McDowell, Head of Oncology Scientific Affairs, GlaxoSmithKline. Jonathan McPherson, Director of Federal Government Affairs at Boehringer Ingelheim. Next, Chris Perney, Head of Federal Policy and Government Affairs at Bristol Myers Squibb. Catherine Newhall, Director of Translation Development and Immune Monitoring in Immuno-Oncology, Celgene. Paul Seligman, Executive Director, Global Regulatory Policy, Amgen. Pooja Sapra, Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer, Pfizer's Oncology Targeted Therapeutics Discovery Unit, Pfizer. And finally, Andrew Womack, Director of Federal Government Affairs at Genentech. What an amazing lineup here in the front row. And again, unprecedented, I think, to have this particular group of companies gathering for this purpose. And it has been wonderful working with the scientists in those companies, putting together this very exciting plan. I also want to thank Dr. Richard Pazder, the Director of Oncology Center of Excellence for the FDA, for joining us today. FDA has been critical in the design of this plan and will provide valuable guidance as the partnership progresses. The idea for the Partnership for Accelerating Cancer Therapies, which we are calling PACT, came nearly 2 years ago when NIH was considering how to work with our private sector colleagues to help advance the goal of the Cancer Moonshot, specifically to cut the time it takes to develop new cancer treatments in half. Over these months, we've worked diligently to come up with an arrangement that could bring the best that each partner has to offer to accelerate the pace for achieving real progress for patients in one of the most exciting areas of development in our lifetime, cancer immunotherapy. I want to thank all the staff from the NIH, the NCI, and the partner organizations in this room who helped turn this vision into a concrete reality. And I particularly want to express gratitude to Maria Frere and David Wally of the Foundation for NIH for the critical role, yes, stand up you two, critical role they have played since the Foundation for NIH will become the project manager for PACT, building on the extensive experience they have had with other partnerships of this sort. We all recognize that something groundbreaking has been happening with cancer immunotherapy. We have seen examples, you will hear one, of dramatic responses, often eradicating cancer completely, even for those with far advanced disease that had failed all other therapies. I'm proud to say that the foundation for these breakthroughs has been built over decades from research supported by NIH, including basic investigations of immunology and oncology, as well as translational research of the kind you might have seen in the first in-human Discovery Channel presentation in August. Dramatic success has been achieved from immunotherapy for certain cancers, including melanoma, leukemia, lymphoma, and some kinds of lung and kidney cancer. But even for those cancers, success does not happen for everyone, as was the case for Bo Cooper, featured in that first in human series, if you saw it. And what about the solid tumors that take so many lives? Cancers of the pancreas, colon, prostate, breast, brain. All of those cancers are making mutant proteins that the immune system ought to be able to recognize, given the right kind of encouragement. But here's where the promise of immunotherapy has mostly yet to be realized. There are some signs, though, that immunotherapy can work there. Shortly, you will hear from Melinda Bikini, a patient who was diagnosed in 2009 with stage 4 intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, a bile duct cancer, and who was treated successfully with immunotherapy at the NIH Clinical Center. She's a patient of Dr. Steven Rosenberg, one of the pioneers of immunotherapy, and she'll share her story with you. And let me say, Dr. Lowy and I are very proud and grateful to have her here with us today. A fundamental question, then, that PACT aims to try to answer is this: why doesn't immunotherapy work for all patients and all types of cancers, and what can we do about that? We need to bring the kind of success that Melinda experienced to more people and more types of cancers, and we need to do it quickly. NIH and all the companies in this room share that goal. These companies are all investing heavily to add successful and improved immunotherapies to their cancer therapeutics programs, seeking to save lives. So when we met to consider a possible partnership, we all agreed that separately we could do a lot, but together we could do it faster. A systematic approach, sharing resources, results, expertise, can simply make more rapid progress. And so the idea of PACT was conceived, and today, PACT is being born. PACT will systematically and uniformly test biomarkers in clinical trials to advance our understanding of the mechanisms of response and resistance to cancer immunotherapy. The partnership will define a set of standardized immune and other related oncology biomarkers and test them across a wide variety of clinical trials. This approach will allow for uniform and harmonized assays to support data reproducibility and consistent generation of data that can be compared across clinical trials from multiple different laboratories and research teams. By standardizing and validating biomarkers for immunotherapy, while also developing and exploring new biomarkers, we hope to advance rapidly toward a new future of precision oncology that benefits all patients. That is our best hope for taking the exciting promise of cancer immunotherapy to the next level. We agree with Harry Truman, who said, "It's amazing what you can accomplish if you do not care who gets the credit." So we're not worried about that. Instead, we're going to evaluate our progress by how quickly it benefits people with cancer. Our next speaker, who will represent the 11 companies who have joined PACT, knows quite a bit about how working together across sectors can bring about essential new knowledge and treatments. He and I worked together on the Human Genome Project a few years ago, one of the biggest biomedical collaborations at that time. His work since then has focused on translational research to prevent, detect, diagnose, and treat cancer, leading to the development of numerous partnerships. He's now bringing that thirst for knowledge to AbbVie as Vice President of Oncology Discovery and Early Development. Suffice it to say, Tom knows a thing or two about partnerships, and we're grateful he's part of the PACT team. So let me turn the microphone over to Dr. Tom Hudson.
Thank you, Francis, Mr. Reed, Mr. Gordish, Doug, Ms. Bacchini, and distinguished guests. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today to speak on behalf of the industry representatives that support the mission of the Partnership for Accelerating Cancer Therapies, or PACT. You know, this is a lot about unmet medical need. The American Cancer Society estimates there'll be almost 1.7 million new cancer cases in the U.S. Diagnosed in 2017. And approximately 600,000 Americans are going to die of cancer this year. These are big, significant unmet medical needs, and it's critical that we work together to drive clinical research and development of innovative therapies in oncology that can ultimately make a big impact in the lives of patients affected by cancer. And we applaud the efforts that are being made to drive forward innovation in oncology. At the same time, we recognize that it's going to be tough. And to do this, we actually do it together. We're trying to address tough challenges, and that includes scientists, physicians, our industry peers, government, patient groups, and the patients themselves. The immune checkpoint blockers have dramatically changed the field of cancer research and clinical oncology by demonstrating that stimulating the immune system can result in tumor cell eradication and improve survival in some patients with cancer. The potential to expand the number of patients that are going to benefit from immuno-oncology or IO drugs is exciting, but also daunting given the biological complexity of the immune response involved both in advancing, promoting tumor, and suppressing tumor. There's many different activities happening inside the tumor of the immune system, which we need to understand. Its emerging data is demonstrating that it's going to be the greatest impact to reach more patients is going to be through the combinations of medicines that affect both immune pathways and non-immune pathways. We need to know what these combinations are. So the successful pursuit of combination therapies is complicated by the sheer number of combinations, the high biological complexity, the need for new translational biomarkers and assays, which are going to help us guide which patients should receive which combinations. So PACT was created as a pre-competitive public-private research collaboration to enable a systematic cross-sector effort to identify and develop standardized biomarkers and related clinical data that are going to support the selection of patients for these combinations. And we're going to develop, again, these very robust assays, which are going to be used, again, to guide which patient to receive what IO therapies and try to avoid resistance to therapies from predicting, again, upfront who's going to respond or not. So the companies, including AbbVie, are actively engaged in the discovery and development of new immunotherapies. It's a very competitive space, but still, we feel we need to work together. We're committed to working together, and we have benefits, too, as industry partners, to be partners in PACT. we're going to have these better assays to actually recognize when our drugs are working or not and start learning to which drugs to give. But it's by having this data that we'll be able to learn when we need to combine. No company will have all the IO drugs. And if we want to come up with the best therapies for patients, we're going to need to combine. And we need this kind of information collected during clinical trials to inform us on the right combination and the right trial to do. It's going to decrease costs by again, have a better knowledge of a design of a trial up front based on really solid science. We're able to, again, avoid some trials which would be less useful than others. And also, we like the PACT helps us partner with clinical leaders and the research community and many organizations in government and beyond in accelerating the patient benefits. So I've been fortunate, as Francis mentioned, I've been part of the Human Genome Project. I led the International Cancer Genome Consortium, the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. These involve many different countries, many different companies and private sector. And it's my experience that we all always benefit a lot more than we thought at the beginning. And some of these benefits have been development of information technology tools to analyze the data, to handle these massive data sets. And also how we've used that, especially in the later consortia in cancer, to actually accelerate the translation, bringing the new ideas to the clinic more rapidly. A lot of it was spurred by these partnerships. So I'm pleased to be here at the launching of PACT because I think it's going to be an important catalyst to improve the translation, accelerate the translation of this new knowledge to the benefit of cancer patients. So on behalf of my industry colleagues, I want to congratulate the National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute, the Food and Drug Administration, the Foundation for the NIH, and the team of scientists from academia and industry that actually worked to get us to here today. So I'm going to turn the podium over to Doug Lowy.
Well, good morning, everyone. A few months ago, I was at a meeting where Congressman Tom Cole was the fifth speaker, and he said, "Everything's already been said, but not by me." We've been hearing a great deal about the promise and the actual achievement of immunotherapy, but we also understand that there are significant problems, and therefore PACT was born. But let me give you a little bit of background. The NCI has been supporting research on immunotherapy for many years, and although we are supporting a lot of it in terms of for research itself, we also, for the last number of years, have been having a conference every year on immunology. One year it's with clinical immunotherapy, and the other year it's more basically oriented. And it just happens that this morning, this year, the meeting is on clinical immunotherapy, and the meeting started this morning, and it's being held at NIH. There are 1,500 people who are coming to that conference. I would also point out that not only is the NIH important for supporting basic research, but when there are advances that come into the clinical arena, we then have to almost redouble our efforts so that we complement what is being done by industry. And one of the things that we did starting last year was the cancer community came together and developed a blue ribbon panel where there were representatives, patient advocates, people from the FDA, there were researchers, people from pharmaceutical industry, et cetera, and came up with a recommendation of 10 recommendations of areas that are poised for acceleration. One of those areas is in immunotherapy. And you are seeing the fruition of part of that recommendation today. The NCI very recently made awards for an immunotherapy network, which was recommended by the Blue Ribbon panel. And the four places for awards are Stanford University, MD Anderson, the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and Mount Sinai. And because of the participation of the pharmaceutical companies, and thank you so much, we really have an opportunity to move faster. And as Dr. Hudson said, we can move faster together than we can separately. There is an African proverb that I really like, which if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this program is going to have a shared governance structure, and we have models at the NIH, largely developed through the Foundation for NIH, such as the Biomarker Consortium, where there is shared governance between the federal government and the private sector. I'm a member of the Biomarkers Executive Committee, and I must say that this shared governance works extremely well. So the goals of this particular area is to try to improve the outlook for patients. The NCI is also very involved in trying to reduce the incidence of cancer, so there are fewer people getting cancer. But here we're talking about when people get cancer, can we improve their outlook? And the precision oncology and the precision immunotherapy that you have been hearing about is really what is making this possible. And what we are looking forward to is the whole being greater than the sum of its parts by people working together, the private sector and the public sector. And the benefits, though, are for our patients. And that brings me to what is the really most fun part of my presentation, which is I get to introduce Melinda Bikini. Long after you have forgotten what the rest of us have said, you will remember her and her story, because this is why we are doing the research for her, and so there will be more people like her. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's become a passion of mine to be able to share my story so that I can provide hope to other patients that I speak with every day. 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with a stage 4 bile duct cancer, cholangiocarcinoma. The prognosis was pretty grim, maybe 6 months or so to live, unless there was a chance for surgery. I did have surgery. I had 2/3 of my liver resected, but unfortunately, 3 months later, it showed up in my lungs. At that time, there is no proven treatment. So I did the standard of care, Gem-Cis, and a couple other things we threw in there just to try. But 2 years into my diagnosis, I was not doing well. And when I found the trial at NIH, I probably had maybe 2 months or so to live. When I found it, I looked at it and I read it and I said, this is what I want to do. It has the chemo to wipe out your immune system, but then it's your immune system fighting your body. Because there was no way at that point in my diagnosis I could have done another chemo treatment. So I entered into this trial 5 years ago, and it was the GI TIL trial at that time. Immediately I had a response. I went home and I remember, it was quite literally a week after coming home, I was able to breathe better. I had so many tumors in my lungs when I first entered into the trial that I had a chronic cough, and it was really hard to function. And after a week, I was able to start walking. Within a month, I was walking my dog. I mean, it was incredible. The treatment was incredible. For about 18 months, I did pretty well on the first round of the TIL treatment. I had shrinkage, I had stabilization, and then it slowly started to grow. But within that time frame, Dr. Rosenberg and his team of researchers were able to discover that one of my T cells was reactive to one of my mutations, the ERB2IP. So they wanted to retreat me again, and I was all for it. I said, absolutely. Went back in again in October of 2013. Had 3 times as many cells, 127 billion put into me, with 95% of that population being that specific T cell to target that mutation. I had a tremendous response for 3 years that continued to shrink my cancer. an incredible quality of life. It was absolutely amazing. Literally a month after my second treatment, I was skiing, and it was incredible. It was the best Christmas present ever. About a year ago, 3 years after the treatment, there looked to be maybe a little bit of growth on a couple of spots left in my lungs. So they took out some tumors, resequenced it, saw that those mutation-reactive T cells were still present, but there was also the presence of the PD-L1, PD-1 proteins. So I went ahead and did 8 doses of the pembrolizumab, and again had incredible response. So as of March, I've had no other treatment besides that. I enjoy a tremendous quality of life. I'm super excited to see the collaboration with everybody for PACT, because that means that there will be more responses like mine, and that means that I can give hope to other patients who I speak to every day. So it was an honor to be here, and I appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melinda. And now we'll begin with the Q&A. And let's start in the room. Renata has a microphone for a reporter, and just want to give a shout out to Renata, who's the true ringleader for today's event. So thank you. And then we'll go to webcast if there are any.
Morning, my name is Matthew Ong. I'm with the Cancer Letter and Oncology News publication here in DC. My first question would be, how much is NIH or NCI contributing to this partnership as opposed to what the pharma companies are contributing? That's the first question. And the second one is, what would NIH's role be in this, and what other institutes are involved? Is this a shared governance, or how is the structure going to work?
Right. Dr. Lowy, do you want to?
So first, the distribution is 160 from the NCI and 55 from the pharmaceutical companies. But your second question, Matt, was other institutes being involved?
Yes.
With the Cancer Moonshot, we actually have involvement with several other institutes, and we have an immunotherapy program which we are doing jointly with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. For PACT itself, that is not happening, but we certainly talk very regularly with colleagues where their expertise is relevant. Where we're focused particularly with our colleagues at NIAID is trying to understand side effects and what to do to try to overcome them.
Thanks, Dr. Lowy. Another question, then we'll go to somebody on the webcast.
Good morning. My name is Laura Kelly. I'm from the Washington Times. Thank you for being here and hosting this press conference. I think, Dr. Hudson, you mentioned that there's some benefits for the industry partners in being part of this partnership. Could anyone who wants to take it just expand on what the companies get from this partnership?
Okay, well, there's many different benefits, and I just want to say we participated in writing the white paper, what this is, and there's a fair amount of work went into this already because we believed in it. The part of what we're talking about standards, it's really important. You know, the computer industry had 19 different IP addresses one day, and then one day the industry said we can't communicate from AOL to others, and they built a standard, and that was enabling to the industry. Pre-competitive collaboration allowed the World Wide Web Consortium to be able to actually elevate the field and basically advance the field of computing. And in the training industry, the same thing. And many years ago, you had different standards in different countries, and so you had to get trained to the border, and you had to unload the stuff to be put on the train between France and Spain because we had different standards. So creation of standards is extremely enabling. And we felt that immuno-oncology, what we want to do is drive very deep responses in patients, and we want to know which patient will benefit from those responses. So as we're doing our studies with new immunotherapies, if we are collecting the same biomarkers with the same standards, we can actually be able to compare this drug worked better than this one. And since the immune response is like at least 12 different subset parts of the pathway, and we want to combine, try to work on T cell proliferation and antigen recognition, we need biomarkers for each of these parts of the immune system and to actually see how our drug did alone and predict whether our drugs are going to come together. So it's enabling to have a standard. It accelerates us making the right decision for the next trial. Again, there are costs to trials, and there are very significant costs to trials. So having more science, more information, allowing us to design the optimal trial is actually saves time and saves money. And the most important resource that we have for trials is the patient themselves. And we would like to be able to optimize the patient population to actually know which one to move to which trial. So personalized medicine, biomarker approaches, things that is coming from especially in oncology, is allowing us to actually try to identify upfront which patient will best respond to a different drug, and actually make every patient trial eligible, or eventually every patient having more options. So it's enabling in many different ways.
Dr. Levy.
I would say we should follow the 3 Rs: rigor, reproducibility, and responses.
All right, thank you. I will go to the webcast. Amanda?
So the question's from Science Magazine. Can you describe the process by which you will select projects to pursue, when studies will begin that are funded by this effort, and which biomarkers will be studied first?
Doug, it might be you again.
We are going to be having a meeting, an organizational meeting of the companies probably next month, and this will be one of the issues that will be determined at that time.
There's a very well worked out governance plan for PACT. Again, this was an effort that was put together over almost 2 years with much input from companies, from NIH, and with strong leadership from the Foundation for NIH. And so now that we're launching this and the baby is being born, it is an opportunity to bring the principals together to form this joint steering committee to define which biomarkers are going to be the highest priority. That's going to be an ongoing discussion as the scientific data builds up. So watch this space. All those things are going to be coming forward quite soon.
Yeah, another part which actually answers both questions is NCI already supports a lot of trials in immuno-oncology. And the core set of biomarkers for genomics to identify mutations and cytokine profiles to look for side effects, they actually have been collected, and they will generate this data set systematically for patients already enrolled in IO trials. And that data set's going to be shared with the partners, but also with the research community, a bit like a TCGA type of program. That too allows scientists to actually do discoveries of responses. So that was very attractive to me to actually see that the fact that NCI already has trials going on, and NCI in immunotherapies are going to be putting the standard tests of generating the data from the samples that we're collecting those trials and making available to industry and to public bodies. So again, that's another thing. There's a governance structure, but there's already things underway which we were going to capitalize on and have some of these data made available in the first year.
All right, thank you. We'll go to the room.
Hi, Lev Fasher with STAT. Just more on the governance structure in terms of long-term intellectual property questions, if whoever could walk us through among the 11 organizations and the NIH, how that will be delineated, essentially.
So we've had a lot of experience in terms of developing these public-private partnerships. There was a mention of AMP, the Accelerating Medicines Partnership, which we have been now conducting. We're 3 years along with that, and I think in the process of establishing that model, came up with very good guidelines about how to handle such issues as data access and intellectual property. And basically, this is like AMP, a pre-competitive partnership where everybody agrees that this is an opportunity to learn about information that then needs to be made accessible to everybody. And intellectual property in the usual traditional way that might happen inside a particular company is not what we're about. And basically, this is to try to develop information that everyone can have access to, and that's part of the terms by which we put PACT together.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Collins. Go to the webcast.
So a question from NBC News. Can you please talk about the percentage of patients currently helped by immune therapies? Also, oh, sorry. That was already answered. So again, the question is, can you please talk about the percentage of patients currently helped by immune therapies?
But It's an easy question to ask and an impossible one to answer. It really depends on the cancer. There are so many different cancer types, et cetera. There are some cancers where the response rate is 50% or substantially higher, and these are people selected for having advanced cancers. And there are other cancers where they are not responding. And we need to understand the 50% to get it closer to 100, and we need to understand the ones where we're not seeing responses. How can we understand that and overcome that so we will start seeing responses?
All right. Thanks, Dr. Lowey.
Matthew Young from the Cancer Letter once again. Will this partnership talk about drug pricing and drug costs? And because that's one of the main questions of the Moonshot back then, will there be an effort to try and address the cost of new drugs going forward as a part of this?
Well, I'll speak. So I actually am not a pricing expert. I'm a scientist, and I've been at a company for a year. But the question of pricing and combinations is one that's really relevant for payers, for patients, and for industry to find the right solution. At this point, the consortium is not really discussing about what the pricing would be. But I do think that we're all driven by trying to find, again, the best value drug or the best value combinations, the ones that are going to give a very deep response to some patients, and avoiding drugs for patients which are not going to respond. So in a way, this higher precision medicine, this ability to predict responders or not, is part of that answer, and one which we hear a lot from payers, that the ability to able to predict who's going to respond from a drug, but also who's not going to respond, is very helpful. So moving to an area of personalized medicine, which allows us to, again, only direct costs where you expect there will be benefits, there's value, is something that we all discuss. But I don't think the consortium itself will be discussing price costs.
Thank you, Dr. Hudson. We'll go, anyone thoughts of somebody's hand up here, but if not, we'll go to the webcast.
So a question from Chemical and Engineering News. Will the pharma company, will this biomarker project help answer questions about combination immunotherapy, which some researchers have said are being conducted without much rationale?
The answer is yes. In fact, that's one of the reasons the consortium came together, where we know, I think, at NCI on CTG, where they keep a repository of all trials, that there's over 1,000 combinations, and which are happening. So that's because everyone thinks let's combine. We thought that PACT be able to collect standard information and be able to correlate those biomarker data with response is going to allow us to actually know which combination to do. So it's almost one of the key reasons why we got involved in PACT, because we don't think that random combinations is the way to go. We need to have science-driven answers, and we can only do that if we are collecting information and sharing information. So that's basically, I hope that's my answer. Good answer.
This is one of several domains where NCI is strongly supporting research to understand better which combinations are likely to be most effective.
Okay. Questions? Jeannie?
Hi, Jeannie Bauman with Bloomberg DNA. I know Dr. Woodcock of FDA has talked about, the importance of developing needs for biomarkers and having standards to use for drug development. And I was wondering how this project will relate, has any relation to that process and stuff.
So I'll take a crack at that, although Rick Pazder in the front row representing FDA could no doubt give a much more erudite response. Yes, of course. In fact, one of the reasons that we're excited about this project is FDA's role, both in the design and now in the conduct of the project, because we not only want to arrive at basic information that may be predictive of what a particular patient might experience when treated with a particular immunotherapy. We would like to see that find its way into a regulatory paradigm, which of course means FDA needs to be very front and center in evaluating the evidence and making sure that it's as rigorous as possible. So yeah, this very much fits with the biomarker discussions that we've been having in many other areas for many years. And there was a mention made of the Biomarkers Consortium, which has been conducting this kind of research across many different disease categories, again, with much help from FDA. But this now zeroes in on an area which I think many of us see as potentially the most rapidly moving and maybe the most exciting in terms of saving lives of people who otherwise have run out of options. So it's great that we have that relationship, that we have that experience, that we've worked with industry, with NIH, with FDA, with the foundation and other things. We're ready to apply that here with every bit of energy we've got.
Okay. Thanks. Right there, and then we'll go back.
Hi, Andrew Siddons from Congressional Quarterly. Thank you. It's been a little more than a year since the Cancer Moonshot launched. What would you say some of the major accomplishments have been so far?
The Cancer Moonshot has resulted in a large number of new initiatives. Of the 10 recommendations that were made by the Blue Ribbon Panel, we put out funding announcements that have been funded within basically 9 months, because the funding was only made in December, and by the end of the fiscal year, we have initiated research in 8 of those 10 areas, and we are planning to be fully engaged in all 10 of those areas by the end of this fiscal year. Be happy to provide more detail.
Okay. Amanda, you have one from the webcast.
Another question from NBC News. What do you need from Congress? How much money is allocated, and what commitment will you need from the federal budget?
There already is a commitment for through the 21st Century Cures Act with the Cancer Moonshot, and the funding that we're talking about is primarily from that. Some amount also comes from the regular appropriation. We have really benefited from strong bipartisan support for NIH research in general over the last few years, and it really is a pleasure to acknowledge that support here. And clearly, you hear that there is strong support from the Trump administration.
Thanks, Dr. Levy. Okay, we have time for one more question, either the room or webcast. Okay, if not, Dr. Collins, do you want to say a few words to wrap up?
Well, I think this is a significant day. These kinds of partnerships can be enormously complicated to put together. There are various phases you go through, from an initial exploration about whether there's an opportunity to then trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of exactly where is the sweet spot that a combination of scientific and resource contributions makes the most sense. Then once one has developed that kind of a plan, it really comes down to, okay, who's in? And I, again, want to express sincere thanks to the 11 companies who decided they were in. That is a commitment of their resources, their time. They're not only saying they're going to take part, they're committing the talents of senior scientists in their companies to be part of this going forward. This is going to be an adventure. I don't think any of us know how it's going to turn out, but it's exactly the right thing to do at this moment of exceptional potential. And if you heard Melinda's story, which I agree is the thing you will most remember about today, just imagine a future time when there are hundreds of thousands of Melindas who can tell stories like that, who are benefited by the way in which we all got together here and decided we're in a hurry, and let's see if we can solve these lingering questions and turn cancer immunotherapy from what seems like an incredibly exciting, promising area, but one that becomes mainstream and actually is applicable to all those other cancers that are desperate for answers and still haven't enjoyed the same benefit that some have. So I think this is a moment to celebrate and a moment to feel that we, the scientific community, have ways in creative fashion to pull together the talents and the resources when we see an opportunity and make it come true. And so for me, this has been a real
pleasure to be part of the team putting this together, and I look forward to seeing now that we've got it together to watch this baby grow up. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. This concludes the press conference. Thanks for joining us this morning.